Okay, I think we might get started. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're all meeting on Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and I'd like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal people who might be here today. And I know that, for example, includes Carrie Walker, who's from the Fitzroy Legal Service Board, and also Vickie Roach, who isn't here but has done a recording that we will share later. My name's Christine O'Laris. I'm the CEO of the Fitzroy Legal Service, and I've been in this role since about October last year. So there's still a lot of people here today that I haven't met, so it's a really great opportunity for me to be able to show my face and say hello to you all. I'd like to welcome everyone to this launch today of Gendered Injustice, the policing and criminalisation of victim survivors of domestic and family violence. We are thrilled to have received more than 300 RSVPs to today's event, highlighting the importance of this topic. The research has been made possible through the financial support of the Victorian Law Foundation, through their Knowledge Grants program, and also the Social Research Assistance platform at La Trobe University. And I know that Lynn Holtain, Executive Director of the Victorian Law Foundation, is here today with quite a few of her team. So thank you very much for your support. We also have the research team, and there's also the report authors here, Dr. Emma Russell, Zhou, and Gabriela Franich. You can't see everyone that's here today, so I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an overview of who's here, because I was pretty impressed when I looked at the list of people, and we've had more than 300 RSVPs to today's event, so that's pretty exciting, and you know, really highlights how important this topic is. But they're people from a range of different sectors, so as you would expect, the legal and justice sectors, but also community organisations, health organisations, women's health organisations. We've got universities, 4 different universities, I think, academics and also students. We've got government departments, VLSB, representative from Kat Theophanous' office, and Lauren O'Dwyer, who's a local candidate. And we've got survivor advocates as well here, which I'm really thrilled to see. So very high representation of the Fitzroy Legal Service board, including our chair, Claire Phoebe. So again, just reiterating how important we think this is. We are recording today's webinar, so you will be able to watch it back if you would like to at a later date. At Fitzroy Legal Service, we know that this is incredibly important research, as it shows how family violence and other social issues come to be treated as criminal legal problems, how women with the complexity of social issues come to end up in our prisons. And importantly, it highlights that this should most definitely not be the case. We hope that through this research, we can lend our voice and evidence to campaigns and calls for actions of victim survivors and other advocates for change. We trust that it will help government, policymakers and practitioners explore the opportunities to make systemic change, to develop new responses, new service models that will prevent women's criminalisation. So that's about it for me in terms of an intro. I would now like to introduce you to Zhou, who will be your MC for the rest of this event. Wei has worked in community legal centres since 2005 and is currently our principal lawyer here at Fitzroy Legal Service. Over the past decade and a half, Wei has worked in areas of criminal law, family violence, mental health and disability, and with imprisoned people. She's particularly interested in examining the ways in which the law and legal systems impact on people who have experienced systemic disadvantage, and is committed to being led by people with lived experience of these harmful systems to demand change. So over to you, Wei.
Thanks so much, Christine, for that introduction. I'd also like to start by acknowledging that I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I will begin by handing the stage over to Emma Russell and Gabriela Franich, who I've been really privileged to have worked alongside in the research team. Dr. Emma Russell is a senior lecturer in crime, justice and legal studies in the Department of Social Inquiry at La Trobe University. She is a critical scholar of policing and punishment, and her research aims to build collaborations that challenge carceral logics, practices and spaces. Gabriela Franich is a PhD candidate and graduate research teaching fellow in criminology at the University of Melbourne. Her research, she considers herself a critical feminist criminologist. Her research focuses on criminalised women's experiences of incarceration and the challenges faced by support workers in the criminal legal system. Gabby also teaches at RMIT University and assists in facilitating the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program at Dame Phyllis Ross Centre. Gabby has worked and volunteered in campaign and advocacy spaces for currently and formerly incarcerated women since 2017, and what she learns from women with lived experience of prison significantly influences her approach to research and teaching. Over to you.
Thanks, Wei. I'm not sure if you can see me. There we go. Thanks, Wei. I would also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri peoples as the sovereign owners of the land I'm speaking on from today. So the Gendered Injustice Study investigated the social, economic, health and legal issues that underpin women's criminalisation. The aim of the research was to explore the specific institutional practices and legal mechanisms that reimagine or frame gendered social issues as criminal issues. By studying this point of overlap or interchange, we hoped to contribute to existing campaigns, policy proposals, and conversations that advocate for alternatives to criminalisation and incarceration, especially those led by First Nations communities and organisations and women and gender diverse people with lived experience of imprisonment. Our intention for this research is to supplement their expertise and to lend further evidence to calls for action. So on the slide there, it provides an overview of the 3 methods of data collection and analysis that we used for this research. So first was to review and classify 108 anonymised client case files from Fitzroy Legal Service that related to women who are criminalised. The second was to look at publicly available statistics on women in prison and women who are respondents on intervention orders to compare and contrast the findings of the Fitzroy Legal Service client base of women who are criminalised. And then lastly, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 11 legal and social service practitioners with current experience of working with criminalised women. If you can change the slide, Wei, we can start to look at some of the findings of the research. So on the left side of the slide, you can see some quotes from interviews that we conducted. And on the right side are some of the statistics we generated from analysing those 108 anonymised case files of criminalised women at Fitzroy Legal Service. So as you can see from the examples on this slide, the focus on victim survivors of domestic and family violence in the title and in the content of the report reflects the findings of the research. So we actually set out to investigate more broadly the overlaps between civil and criminal legal issues for women and the social context for these. But what we found, perhaps unsurprisingly, was that domestic and family violence was the most frequently discussed topic in interviews. and also that more than half of the clients in the case file review, 55%, identified domestic and family violence as relevant to their criminal legal charges. In particular, the problem of police misidentifying women who are victim survivors as predominant aggressors in domestic and family violence incidents was consistent across all of our data sets. And we found that misidentification has a range of flow-on effects, including systemic collusion between police and people perpetrating abuse, re-victimization, further marginalization, and criminalisation for women who are victim survivors. You can move to the next slide now, Wei. Thank you. Many of the underlying social, financial, and health issues that we found were prevalent amongst women who were criminalised, specifically poverty, homelessness, and housing insecurity, mental illness, psychological distress, and alcohol and drug dependency. They're not crimes in and of themselves, but what happens is that they become transformed into criminal issues that then siphon women into the criminal legal system through a combination of discriminatory and aggressive policing practices, punitive laws and legal cultures, and a lack of investment in accessible social support systems. We also found that rigid and siloed models of support service delivery can fail to counter or prevent cycles of criminalisation, and they can also inadvertently construct women as disengaged. Next slide, please. We also found that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are especially impacted by over-policing and police racial profiling. Systemic racism, transphobia, and ableism shape police responses to women that frequently escalate conflict, dissuade them from cooperating with police, and lead to criminalisation and exclusion from potential support services. We also learned that criminal legal responses to women experiencing mental illness and or psychological distress are frequently gendered and punitive. This is in part because of gendered expectations, such as women should be selfless caregivers or passive victims of violence. And when women fail to embody these molds of ideal victimhood because of their race or gender, financial or health status, their involvement with police can, as one participant put it, open up punishment rather than assistance. So with these findings in mind, we've made several recommendations in the report, which I'll now hand over to Gabby to outline.
Hi everyone, my name's Gabby. Again, I can't tell whether my camera is on or not, but hopefully you can see me. And it's wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you all so much for coming. I would also like to start by saying that I am speaking from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and that I live and work on the lands of the Kulin Nations and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. We know that sovereignty was never ceded and that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also want to extend heartfelt thanks to Emma and Wei for inviting me to be part of this project. It's been a privilege to work with them on such important research. So as Emma said, I will be going over the recommendations that we included in our report. So our first recommendation was to expand safe and accessible public housing options for women. And we have some very inspiring members of the Homes Not Prisons Steering Committee on the panel today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing them speak more on that point. Our following recommendation was to divest from prisons and move away from an over-reliance on policing and to respond to the broad range of complex social, economic and health issues that many criminalised women face. We also recommended that we build effective independent police oversight and accountability systems. And I know that Ray, another inspiring panellist, will speak to these recommendations in a really powerful way. Following that, we recommend that there is a research and public policy agenda developed that aims to explore, fund and enhance alternatives to police and prisons. and also to invest in holistic, collaborative and multidisciplinary support services and systems for women that are culturally safe for Aboriginal women. And while we were writing this report, our thoughts have been with the Aboriginal women who have died in custody and their families. The next is to urgently fix Victoria's bail laws and to reduce women's remand rates. I'm doing my own research in this area, so I'm looking forward to building on the report with that. And there are also petitions regarding bail law reform in Victoria by Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and ISJA. And another second to last recommendation is to decriminalise public drunkenness and illicit drug use. And on that recommendation, I want to acknowledge the staunch and powerful work of the Day family following the passing of Tanya Day, and also the incredible work of the Dajua Foundation in covering the coronial inquest into the death of Veronica Nelson. Our final recommendation is to develop training for lawyers on how to effectively address or engage with complex needs outside of legal needs. And this includes identifying where and how domestic and family violence victimisation might be relevant to women's criminal legal matters. So in summary, in writing this report, we came to believe and recommend that social, economic and health issues should not be dealt with through the criminal justice system, because the criminal legal system compounds and reproduces these issues and fuels cycles of trauma and marginalisation for women who are experiencing domestic and family violence. Strategies for decarceration are clearly needed, and we believe they are very viable, especially when examining patterns of women's criminalisation, as Emma touched on. These alternatives include diverting funds away from policing and prisons and towards public housing and holistic support systems that will improve gender and racial equality and community safety. Thank you so much, everyone, and I will now pass back to Wei to introduce our amazing panelists.
Thank you, Gabby and Emma, for that. It's so fantastic to hear those recommendations. I think they really highlight some concrete ways to address women's criminalisation, and in particular prompts a real need for discussion around the ways to find alternatives for policing and prisons. I had the privilege to speak with the amazing Vickie Roach earlier this week, and we'll now play a snippet of our conversation. But before that, I just want to introduce Vickie Roach, who is a woman who requires no introduction. Vickie is a Yuin woman who, along with her mother, were both members of the stolen generation. Vickie, who left school in Year 7, gained a master's degree in writing from Swinburne University while in prison. Notably, also while in prison, Vickie participated in the 2007 High Court challenge that succeeded in striking out legislation banning prisoners serving 3 years and under from voting. In the same year, along with Charandev Singh, she was named joint winners of the Tim McCoy Human Rights Award. Currently, Vickie devotes her time to activism and advocacy around issues concerning First Nations women in prison, violence against women and deaths in custody. Vickie is especially energised by current conversations around the dismantling of the military and prison industrial complex and the defunding of police. Vickie is a writer, a poet, a public speaker and an activist, and an advocate for women, particularly Aboriginal women who have been caught up in the criminal justice system.
Because policing and imprisonment breeds more policing. Imprisonment. And, you know, look, what do we want? Do we want a society that's, you know, that's so full of laws that everybody is a potential prisoner and everybody becomes, everybody is treated as a potential prisoner. We should all be very concerned about the growth of the prison industrial complex, and we should all be concerned about prison abolition. because, as I've said many times before, a society should be judged by the way it treats its most disadvantaged people, not in the way it treats its wealthiest or its most privileged. And in that respect, we're falling right down on the job, because we are not treating people in a way that respects their human rights in prisons and as part of the prison industrial complex, which includes the military, which is frightening, because we are all part of that system. And there's no escaping it, just as there is no escaping prisons, which is why we don't need any more prisons on this earth, particularly as they are becoming privatised, and it's merely bodies for profit. I think we can do a lot better than that, and there are countries around the world that have shown us that it can be done much better than imprisoning people, incarcerating them, abusing them, and traumatising them further. Well, people, countries, I mean, that have successfully dealt with the prison systems in their country and their countries still have prisons, but what they've done with people who have committed an offence against society is that they don't punish them. They say to them, what have we done? What has society done to fail you, where you've had to go and do this thing that has gotten you in trouble? You know, like, what can we do to make it better? And what can be done, excuse me, is ensure that everybody has enough, has somewhere to live, has somewhere safe, affordable to live, that they have, and a home, not just a roof over their heads, a home, a proper home, a quality education, capacity for jobs, and a society where they're not monitored and policed at every turn. That's what we deserve. That's what humans deserve. And we find that most people in prison come from these demographics where there is homelessness and poverty and severe lack of basic services and necessities of life, basically, that are finding themselves in prison. And my particular point is that prisons are increasingly becoming privatised, as are many of our social services in Australia. You might have recently heard on the news that there's 4 or 5 companies who are no longer going to be used by the new government to operate the call centres of the Australian Tax Office, I think it was. But they operate the call centres of the tax office, settling Medicare, the ATO, and the Department of Housing, which is now the Department of Communities and Justice. So we've actually have a prison company running this country, or providing all the services to society, to the society of this country, that a government should be providing. And it's all been contracted out to prison companies. And it has to make you wonder why. And it has to make you wonder why they are continually building huge prisons in Australia, where the crime rate is actually dropping. And most of the women, I understand, in prison in Victoria are on remand. They're not even sentenced prisoners. We can do better, particularly in this country. We have the capacity to do better. We have the will to do better. And in my belief, society in general wants to do better. And I think it's very difficult to talk about abolishing prisons, because you always come up against, well, what are we going to do with all the dangerous people, or all the people who might kill you or rape you or molest your children? There will still be a need to protect society or keep society safe from such people, but we do not need a prison industrial complex to do that. We need humane places that keep these people, or keep society safe from these people, without punishing them further, which is not a popular view. People want to punish them, but that's what prison's all about, isn't it? Revenge. It's not about corrections, as it's called, unless you want to put them in the context of a gulag, you know, where you're beaten until you're corrected into doing the right thing. We don't need that kind of influence in our society if we want a safe and happy community.
Thank you, Vickie. It's always such a privilege to hear Vickie Roach speak. I'm now going to ask the panelists to reflect on the findings of the Gendered Injustice Report and Vickie's words as well. But before I do that, I will introduce...
Because policing...
Sorry. I'll introduce our panelists, expert panelists, Nina, Sara, and Ray Alphonso. Nina's love language is abolition. Formerly incarcerated and a survivor of domestic and sexual abuse, she works as a systemic advocate on the Victim Survivors Advisory Council and on the expert advisory panel at Safe and Equal. Nina is all about having choice and control, something that was stripped from her by the injustices of our systems. Nina hopes to end the stigma that is attached to being criminalised and create awareness as to why women offend. We are surviving. Sara, in her own words, I am driven toward social change and abolishing the carceral prison system, dismantling current destructive systemic structures which oppress women and destroy lives. These systems continue perpetuating further harm due to the system's commitment to exert power and control on those most vulnerable within society. I stand in solidarity with all oppressed women and will continue to fight the good fight for our women, our children, and our rights. I work, study, volunteer and advocate for our marginalised humans and share my personal lived experience and knowledge of the system to enhance my practice in these areas. My primary goal is to completely dismantle the system that is based on the idealised patriarchal notion that has been socialised to render women powerless. As a strong woman, I will be taking back my power for good. We are women and we will never be silenced. And Ray Alphonso is the Family Violence Justice Project Coordinator in the Systemic Advocacy and Support Team of Flat Out. Flat Out is a statewide homelessness support and advocacy service for women and gender diverse people who have been criminalised in Victoria. Flat Out leads and participates in research and community education, seeking to inform the wider community about the harms that occur in the criminal legal system. Flat Out also works directly with women and gender diverse people who have experienced criminalisation in developing and implementing systemic advocacy and capacity building for the service sectors. Thank you so much for joining us, Nina, Sara and Ray. So we've just heard from Vickie Roach and the authors of the Gendered Injustice Report about the need to move away from over-reliance on policing. I'd really like to talk a little bit more about that and what in your view, how in your view does policing fail victim survivors of domestic and family violence?
I'm happy to jump in. I just would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that I'm on Bunurong land, which is Merlau, otherwise renamed as Phillip Island, and pay my respects to the resistance of all Aboriginal people, in particular the elders that continue to pass down traditions, ceremonies, stories, and, you know, so we are able to share culture. And I think I'd like to start with just the term domestic violence. I think that sometimes limits the picture to an act of violence that's happened within the home between family members. And I just want to take the opportunity to say that for me, domestic violence goes deeper than that, and it's an element of power and control and abuse, which is anything from sexual, physical, manipulative behaviours, gaslighting, coercion, sexual assault, and want to say my thanks into all the efforts that have been done in this report, because it really highlights too the systemic abuse, which doesn't get talked about, and because of domestic violence and how it's framed, the systemic abuse is never spoken of. And I, as a survivor, I think the complexities of being a survivor have the implications of resulting in homelessness, mental ill health. We self-medicate with alcohol and other drugs, which in turn then becomes us targets to police, and then we are incarcerated and punished and discredited and pushed further into the shadows. And when we do reach out to police, they portray exactly the same power imbalances, control and abuse that a domestic violent relationship would. So we are then re-traumatised.
Thank you, Nina. Sara, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Nina, as well. That was beautiful, everything you said there, 100%. I also want to acknowledge that I am speaking, living, breathing on stolen land, and I don't need to say much more because we know, and there's been plenty of instructions around the acknowledgement. So I just wanted to make note. And yeah, in regards to, like domestic violence and policing, I feel like exactly what Nina said as well. Like, it doesn't just, it's not a once-off physical assault incident that within a home context that defines domestic violence. Like, it is more broad than that. It should be abuse in general as an overview, not just domestic because it's underneath a roof with maybe potential partner or a family member of some sort. Like, it's actually abuse, regardless of how they are related to you. You know, and the system perpetuates exactly the same. You know, you don't have leg to stand on. You're very controlled. You're in a system. When you're stuck in prison, you know, you're told when to strip, when to get naked, when to, you know, literally bend over and squat, you know, do all these things that are very degrading to a human being. You know, and you're underneath a system that has the approval to treat people like that, you know, and it's absolute bullshit. You know, and policing domestic violence is only causing further harm. You know, if you're policing something but you're also acting it doesn't make a difference. You know, it doesn't change anything because police wear a uniform that allow them to perpetuate that behavior, but yet, you know, they're policing exactly the behavior that they themselves, you know, do to others. And I find, you know, being as well a survivor and a woman of, you know, sexual abuse, you know, physical, all the like different versions of abuse, you know, but being abused, you know, and then being in a system where you've got nowhere to turn to. You know, I'm using substances, but there's still nowhere to turn to. Not now, I'm not, but like, you know, at the time, you know, and all these different things. And there's nowhere for women to be able to feel free that they can escape. Women are only put in positions where they can either sell drugs to support their habits, sell their bodies, which is more degrading, which are finding themselves more traumatized, more abused. You know, there is no avenue for women to be able to feel safe and free. We end up homeless because we don't have adequate housing. We don't have anywhere else to go. We depend and socialize to depend on males, you know, to get us through in this society, you know, and that's got to change. You know, the police is a male-dominated culture. We know that. Like, why would you know, police have become like this idolized saviors or something like that within a social context, which they're not. They don't. They are wearing uniform to exert power and control. You know, and that's the thing. You know, and the same with the carceral system. You know, and you know, when we get, you know, incarcerated and put into the prison industrial complex, it's the same routine and same structures there as well. You know, just both people wearing a different color uniform. Yeah, okay. I'm fully against it. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Sara. And so what I'm picking up on from both you, Sara, and you, Nina, is that the way in which policing happens for women who are experiencing family and domestic violence replicates some of the power structures that are experienced. Ray, can you add to that or talk us through your experience of that as well?
Yeah, so hi everyone, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad that this report exists. I just really want to acknowledge Auntie Vickie's work for this session as well, and just her lifetime of work. And I've recently moved up to Gubbi Gubbi country, so that's where I'm phoning in from. Thanks Sara and Nina as well. I mean, I can't really say anything more acutely and beautifully than you both did, but just to reiterate that, yeah, the police are the sword arm of broader structures of power and control, and power flows downhill, right? So it's going to flow along those fault lines of racism and sexism and misogyny and transphobia. And thanks so much, Sara and Nina, for just really pushing that point that, yeah, the police are the pointy end. So you've got police perpetrated family violence, and you've got police breaches of duty and police harassment and racial profiling. You've got police rocking up as first responders and escalating a situation or misidentifying a woman. But it's so much more nuanced and complex than that. You know, the fact that the police even exist and are the pillar of safety for women who are experiencing family violence completely ignores those broader systemic systems, assumes that they will champion and uphold the safety of all women. And I think what the other panelists have really highlighted is, you know, a lifetime of being at the pointy end of all of those the systemic failures and that systemic harm. You know, it makes women vulnerable. And I really like us to focus on that and to not say vulnerable women, because there's nothing vulnerable about the people that we work with and support. They're made vulnerable or forced into, you know, vulnerable circumstances, or where they're subject to harm, not because of anything to do with them, but because of those overarching systems and structures. And that not only, as Sarah and Nina said, primes them to be targets for further police violence and harassment, primes them to be, further targeted for domestic and family violence, primes them for, to be targeted by the criminal legal system, primes them to have a really poor response from police that makes them less safe. And it just goes on and compounds and compounds and compounds. So I think that, the reality is that there is no way to make a nice prison or make police nice. We've put however many millions and billions of dollars into that. And I just really urge people to really do the research, read reports like Emma's and Gabby's, and really put those pieces together and be like, okay, we've really had a go at making police nice. We've given them how many millions of dollars to respond better to family violence. And I really think that, perhaps that has, in my experience, improved responses for some women. But where the buck starts to stop, it's for women who have already been subject to systemic harm and harassment. Women who've been, that's where it stops. If women are engaged in other criminalised behaviours, then the buck stops there because they're still criminals. So if you are the ideal victim, then maybe you're going to get a better police response that improves your safety. But if you're not, you've got buckleys. And that's just not good enough. And there's no way to reform that system because it's a power over system. And we need a power with, community, which is what abolition offers. So, yeah. Thanks, both of you. I hope that was quite long-winded, but I hope that makes sense in there somewhere.
No, absolutely, Ray. And I just want to pick up on what you have been talking about, and particularly around misidentification, because concerns about police practice of misidentification of the predominant aggressor in domestic and family violence incidents have been growing. What do the members of the panel think that people should know about this phenomenon?
I'll just quickly speak to it, what I can. I would just want to say, women are majority of the time defending themselves, and that's at some stage it gets to a point where you have no choice but to try to defend yourself or somehow protect yourself to save your life. You're in survival mode. If you're, however that looks, if you're in survival mode, you're going to do what you can to live, even though you may be literally crumbled and wanting to die because you can't get out of the situation, but naturally as humans, you go into survival mode. And a lot of the time, we see women who are incarcerated because of the fact that they defended themselves, but yet they look like, and they get made to be the ones, because they defended themselves, that they are the ones that perpetrated the violence. And the male gets to then walk away scot-free and continue to blame and shame and take no accountability for their behaviours that have led up to that incident, or however that looks anyway. If a woman's in jail because of a response to family violence, and they responded and reacted because of what's happening to them, it's usually the last straw and the cherry on top, and that was the only way they could escape what they were going through. They shouldn't be criminalised and incarcerated for trying to protect themselves.
I think it's sort of entwined into the first question, isn't it? That when police come as first respondents to a scene, because police and the justice system are so ingrained and rooted in patriarchy that if a woman presents as not fitting into gender norms or gender stereotypes, and presents as hysterical or irate or any of those in crisis mode responses, that she's easily identified as the progressor because we're just not fitting into those gender norms. And I'd like to highlight too that in most instances that I hear, perpetrators are very calm and collected and cunning and have it all together. And I think it's very easy to for the person who uses violence to discredit someone when they are so out of control, and in moments of crisis, that's what we are as human beings. We are struggling. So yeah, that's my bit.
I think from my perspective, and obviously working around Miss ID and building better sector responses and capacity to recognise misidentification, it's just really important to remember that on the one hand, it's great that misidentification's become more of a thing and there's more awareness about it, but you can't layer that on top of these existing reformist approaches to the criminal legal centre, because what will happen is anybody then who falls outside that nice neat box of like, oh, she was just using resistive force in that one incident when she's got no prior criminal history or any other behaviours that she's engaging in, and she really also is willing and has the capacity to engage with appealing that, and we go tick, and that's very nice and neat and simple. And actually, I urge anyone who's in here who's working in research, who's working in the criminal legal space, who's working in policy, to please try. I know it's more complex, but Miss ID is so much more nuanced, as everything to do with this is. It doesn't have a nice, neat, discrete framework or a nice, neat, discrete solution. I think that women are misidentified in all kinds of ways, whether they're misidentified as the primary aggressor, whether they're involved in crimes of poverty and survival that are a direct result of their experience of family violence, whether they're using resistive force in other areas of their life that's a response to the harms that they're experiencing. There's so many different ways and layers that women can be misidentified, and also having this kind of lens or focus on reforming this exist solely in a criminal legal context can be really isolating for women too, because many women don't want any further dealings. They're not necessarily interested in being having that rectified in a criminal legal setting. So what does that mean? They get left out then. They may well have been in a criminal legal context misidentified, but maybe they don't want to even think about that because they're too busy trying to be reunified with their kids, or they're too busy trying to get stable, secure housing, which is way higher on their priority list, as it should be. So yeah, I just think on the one hand, I'm glad that Miss ID is out there in the ether and people are talking about it, but what I'm worried about is that we're going to get a really oversimplified, really limited response and tick that off the list, and meanwhile so many more women are going to continue falling through the cracks and be further alienated by this kind of reformist approach, if that makes sense. Did you want to add to that, Sarah or Nina?
Yeah, I just want to quickly just add, I love what you said there too, Ray. In regards to the fact that, oh my gosh, sorry, I got COVID, so I've got COVID brain really bad just then. I don't know what I was going to say. I just lost it. Sorry about that.
I will just add a few things that, I think that that's one of the issues too with having police as the first point of contact is it takes that freedom of choice away from us, because we sometimes do not want to have police involved, period. And I think too that like in moments of misidentification, whether it's got to do with DV or whether it's criminal matters, women will plead guilty in order to get back to their caretaking responsibilities. And as then, and then the cycle sort of continues, right? Because we go, okay, well, we're trying to leave these circumstances, police get involved, then there's all these consequences that we have to deal with. We plead guilty, we become criminalised, then it's further difficult to get employment, housing, we suffer at the hands of the state because we're traumatised by systemic issues, and it just stacks on and it gets harder for you to survive as a human being in this world. So I think that identification does go really, really broad, and when we are in the system, it's that slogan, we do the time, we do the crime. It's as if once you've done something, whether you're mis-ID'd or not, there's an end to that sentencing, whether you've pled guilty for whatever reason, that continues to stay with you in time. So it's really important to be talking about this.
I do remember, I just quickly jotted it down so I wouldn't lose it again. The perfect victim. I am tired of hearing about the perfect victim, the person who has never used a substance in their life, who has not, gone through particular, things in it, like had to go through the disadvantage of the society in which we live, and and then something occurs in their life, and then it's like, oh no, that's, we need to move away from the perfect victim, the victim mentality, the whole thing like that. We need to start looking at people's experiences and looking at people as human. We need a humane and humanity approach. I'm tired of it having to be this way, this way, or, etc. It needs to actually just be, we're humans in a dysfunctional society, right, that perpetuates and has, been embedded and built upon, power and control and as I said before, like around, male domination and entitlement and all these different things that makes it so, women are always going to be segregated and less than, and regardless of whether you've experienced things and you may have grown up in a loving environment, and then, something's happened to you later in a relationship, or regardless of whether you're, you've been fighting the system your whole entire life, running away from care, you've been sexually abused, physically abused, you've been neglected, abandoned, using substances to get through all these traumas and stuff like that. Like, a person is still experiencing what they're experiencing, and we need to have a human response. The criminal justice system it's not, how is it responding and picking up a key, locking people away? How is that even responding to anything? It's just, what you're doing is sweeping it under the rug and leaving things to continue. That doesn't break the cycle. We need to break the cycle.
Thank you so much. That's also very powerful, and I love the idea about thinking about a human response. All three of you have spoken really publicly about your passion and support for the idea of prison abolition, which in my view is a human response. Why should we centre abolition in our thinking, advocacy and practice around policing, criminalisation and imprisonment? It's a big question.
Look, I think we can see that the prison industrial system and complex is not working. If it was working, they would be getting emptier, not more full. And I think it's been already said today that, I think it was Vickie that mentioned it, with the laws and legislation and everything that's going on, it's really hard not to become criminalised in this world. I think that, there are so many things that you can be charged for, and there's no solution in that. We're not getting anywhere. We are just creating broken people, traumatized events, and there's no reform in it. I think we really need to start supporting individuals on their journey as to where they are at, and prison doesn't provide that, policing doesn't provide that. It just exacerbates all of the harms and the traumas that we've already been through. I think that we just need to have a really person-centered approach and start addressing these things and having these uncomfortable conversations and recognizing that, putting more policies and more, hurdles and stuff to jump through is not going to create healthier communities.
Yeah, and the paramilitarization of police, of the police force, and there's all these over-exaggerated ways of responding to human harm. When people are being hurt, why do we have to have it when, there is so much, what do you call it? Our society feeds off power and control a lot, and that's living in a society where we have fear of authority figures and all these different things. All my life, anyone who I think's in an authority position, there's natural fear, right? And we're living in fear. We don't have anywhere safe to go. There's so many women out there who have nowhere safe to go, who are literally continuously fighting day in, day out. Just the only reason they're still here is because they're still breathing and they're still just trying to get through. But they don't know how to live life. They don't have a life to live because nobody's helping them. There's no housing available. We need to start seeing, affordable by being cheap within affordability, you know what I mean, and like, you know, have housing, safe, adequate housing, have responses to, you know, community responses. I want to see community responses. Why's it always got to be the police have to be involved? You know, why does it have to be everything has to be a law? Who died and made everyone king to decide what laws are made and what's not criminal, what is criminal? Do you know what I mean? Like everybody, we need to be working together as humans. If we want to see changes for the generations ahead, there's so much that can be done today, you know, and there's so many lives that can be saved today. It's just a matter of, you know, stopping conforming to, you know, what society and the system has made us all do, you know, for such a long time. It's about changing that. And, you know, I don't mind getting messy. We need to be in the mess to create, you know, to start cleaning it up. And I'm happy to get messy. You know what I mean? Like I want to, and I want to start seeing these changes, you know, and I know strength in numbers can create massive change. So I think if we all work together, really work together, you know, there's writing reports and there's providing recommendations, then recommendations are great. Imagine if we implemented them and turned them into reality, you know, how great a society would start living in. So, yeah, I have nothing more to say on that. I just know that change is possible and we can all change if we work together.
I just want to quickly bounce off what you just said, Sara, in regards to all banding together. Like, you know, I was just sitting there and reflecting the amount of time and resources and efforts as a society we go into fighting the injustices of the system and all the money that gets pumped into it. And, you know, and we just keep butting heads and it's just causing so much harm. And if we all didn't have to fight against that system and go through laws and policies and, you know, and fund police and fund prisons and expand prisons, and if all of that money, time, resources and energy went into building homes and gave people places to land and be supported and be fed and housed, we would be able to land as a society and just take a breath and move forward and be able to, you know, I think that none of these really deep-seated issues can be addressed anywhere until we feel safe and comfortable to do so in the safety of a home.
Thank you. We are close to the end of our session. I do have a very special poem that Auntie Vickie Roach has prepared for us that I really wanted to share, and it is really timely just with what everyone has said. The hope that is there that, you know, Sara, you said change is possible, and Nina, you talked about all banding together, and I think that this poem really represents that moment. So I'd like to thank all three of you panelists for participating. It's been really incredible to hear all of your views, and thanks again for all your time and sharing with us. I will now share Vickie's poem.
I'd just like to acknowledge here that I'm a Yuin woman speaking to you from Yuin country down on the south coast of New South Wales. The poem I'm about to read you is one I've written recently. It's called Patience. We are of this time, yet we are not, for we are timeless, ageless, and patient. Our bodies comprising the DNA of flora, fauna, rock and stone, and the waters of our rivers and oceans are restless. But we are patient. Constructed by this timeless land, from this timeless land, of this timeless land, we are patient. Our ancestors watch as you cage us in cells made of stone and metal, fashioned from the very elements of the DNA in our blood, elements that made you rich. You think we won't be missed. You're wrong. We are patient. We are ageless, timeless, and we've always been here. with our ancestors beside us. We have no fear. The end of our ancestors' patience draws near. Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I'd like to sincerely thank Vickie Roach for speaking with us and recording, even though she's been really busy, and giving us access to her really beautiful poem. Thanks also to all of our speakers today, to Dr. Emma Russell, Gabriela Franich, Nina, Sara, and Ray Alphonso, and thanks to Christina Olaris for opening for us as well. And thank you everyone for being interested in this topic and for coming along today.